Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm just so glad you could join us today because we are about to completely flip the script on how you understand the modern world.
Yeah, it's a pretty massive paradigm shift.
It really is. I mean, think about how history is usually taught to you. It's almost always a timeline of isolated achievements, right? Usually by a handful of celebrated figures, like a guy invents a thing, another guy discovers a law of physics.
Right, the lone genius myth.
Exactly. But today we're looking at a stack of sources that reveals a completely different causal structure of history.
Because when you look at the actual architecture of our world, science, technology, medicine, society, you realize progress isn't just a series of random light bulb moments, it's layered dependency.
Layered dependency, I like that.
Yeah, mathematical abstraction has to exist before computation can happen. Physical theory precedes engineering. And what our sources today show is that so many of these foundational layers, the very bedrock of our reality, were laid down by women.
Which is just mind-blowing when you see it all laid out. But before we get into the specifics, I need to make something incredibly clear to you. The women covered in today's deep dive represent not even 5% of the women out there who are incredibly important to our world as a whole.
Not even close to 5%.
Right. There are so many more whose work shaped civilization. But our mission today is to show you how the discoveries of the women we are covering aren't just, symbolic additions to the timeline. They are the literal foundations upon which current fields exist.
A literal bedrock.
Exactly. So let's start by unpacking the very fabric of reality itself. We're talking the Earth, math, and the stars.
Well, if we're examining the physical structures around you right now, like the buildings or the bridges you drive over, we really have to start in 1815 with Sophie Germain.
Oh, her story's wild. She was barred from attending the École Polytechnique in France just because of her gender.
Yeah.
So she studied using secretly obtained lecture notes, and she actually corresponded with other mathematicians under a male pseudonym, Monsieur Leblanc.
And under that fake name, she developed the first correct mathematical formulation describing how solid materials deform under stress.
Which sounds very technical, but
we really need to pause on the practical application of that, actually. Because before Germain, building structures was largely based on empirical guesswork.
you just stacked materials and hoped they didn't fall down.
Pretty much. Her equations governing the bending, stretching, and vibration of materials gave structural mechanics a rigorous mathematical starting point. She essentially handed engineers the instruction manual for the modern world.
So modern structural engineering, skyscrapers, suspension bridges, they simply wouldn't stand without her math.
They really wouldn't.
Wow. So she made physical structures mathematically intelligible. And if we take that idea of elasticity and vibration and apply it to the Earth itself, we arrive at Inge Lehmann in 1936.
Right, the seismologist.
Yeah, she essentially used earthquakes to listen to the inside of the planet.
Which was revolutionary. At the time, the accepted model was that the Earth had a completely liquid core. But by analyzing seismic waves from earthquakes, Lehmann noticed those waves were reflecting and refracting in ways that made absolutely no sense under the liquid core model.
To put it simply, it's a bit like tapping on a watermelon to see if it's hollow or dense, but doing it with the shock waves of an earthquake.
That's a great analogy.
And Lehmann proved that the Earth actually has a solid inner core surrounded by a liquid outer core.
And that realization created modern deep Earth seismology. I mean, it corrected the geophysical model of our planet, which is essential for everything from understanding the Earth's magnetic field to modern earthquake analysis. We just had the wrong map of the planet's interior until she measured the anomalies.
And just as we had the wrong map of the Earth, we apparently had the wrong map of the stars.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in 1925, Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin completely overturned a core assumption of astronomy. Everyone thought stars had the same chemical composition as Earth, mostly heavy rocks and metals. But she applied new equations to stellar spectra and realized that stars are made overwhelmingly of hydrogen and helium.
And her reward for fundamentally changing our understanding of the universe was being pressured by senior male astronomers to downplay her findings.
Just because they contradicted the consensus.
Exactly. But she held firm, and her work literally gave birth to modern astrophysics. We wouldn't understand stellar evolution or the chemical makeup of the universe if she hadn't looked at the light spectrum and told us what the stars are actually made of.
It takes immense resilience to look at the consensus and tell the experts they are wrong. And we see that same resilience in Emmy Noether around 1915, who is developing the underlying mathematical rules for the universe in Germany.
Right. Noether's work is foundational.
It is. Before we get into her math, though, I should pause and add a quick note on the history here, as she eventually had to flee the country due to anti-Semitic laws. As a rule for this show, when talking about politics-related historical events in our sources, such as the actions of the Nazi regime, we're not taking any side. We're just stating what the research shows, and we do not endorse any political viewpoints.
So with that context in mind, we can look at Noether's theorem. This is the ultimate mathematical backbone of modern physics.
The ultimate backbone.
Yes. She proved that every continuous symmetry in nature corresponds to a conservation law.
Let's break that down for a second for you listening. If you think of the universe like a game, time symmetry means the rules of the game don't change whether you play today or tomorrow.
Right.
And Noether proved that because that symmetry exists, energy is conserved. Spatial symmetry means the rules don't change whether you play here or across the galaxy, which means momentum is conserved.
She unified modern physics. I mean, without her theorem, conservation laws are just empirical coincidences. We would just be guessing that energy is conserved because we've never seen it destroyed.
But Noether provided the mathematical proof.
Exactly, giving Einstein's general relativity absolute coherence.
She gave us the rule book for reality, which transitions us perfectly into our next era, the atomic age and the architecture of the nucleus.
Yes, moving from the cosmos down to the atom.
Marie Curie in 1898 is widely known, obviously, but our sources point out a crucial distinction. She didn't just contribute to existing fields.
No, she created them.
She coined the term radioactivity and discovered polonium and radium.
And a really striking detail from the sources, her original laboratory notebooks are still so radioactive today that they have to be kept in lead-lined boxes.
That is just incredible.
She worked without institutional protection, directly exposed to radiation, to prove that atoms are divisible and dynamic. Every time you see modern cancer radiotherapy or medical imaging like a PET scan, you are looking at the direct downstream result of her sacrifice and intellect.
Taking that concept of the dynamic atom even further, Lise Meitner enters the picture in 1938.
Right, interpreting the splitting of the atom.
Yeah, she provided the theoretical explanation for nuclear fission. She was looking at experiments that showed a uranium nucleus had actually split apart, releasing enormous energy.
And Meitner calculated that energy release using EMC passion. She transformed nuclear physics into an energy science. Though our sources do note, she explicitly opposed using this knowledge for weapons.
She called it a moral failure of science, didn't she?
She did. But her theoretical explanation remains the absolute foundation of both nuclear energy and our understanding of chain reactions.
So once we knew the atom could be split, we had to figure out how it was built. And Maria Goeppert-Mayer introduced what she called magic numbers for the atomic nucleus in 1949.
Because the stability of different atomic nuclei was a total mystery before her work.
Right.
She built the nuclear shell model. So think of the nucleus not as a random jumble of particles, but like a highly structured apartment building. She proved that protons and neutrons occupy quantized energy, shell-specific floors they have to live on.
So this gave the nucleus an internal architecture, making nuclear physics a predictive science rather than just a descriptive one.
Exactly.
And then in 1956, Qin-Sheng Wu performs an experiment that fundamentally rewrites the laws of physics.
The parity violation experiment.
Yes. She tested beta decay at ultra-low temperatures. For decades, physicists assumed the universe was a perfect mirror, that physical laws functioned identically for left-handed and right-handed orientations.
The assumption of perfect mirror symmetry was elegant, but Wu proved it was entirely false.
She shattered the mirror.
She really did. She proved that the subatomic universe is not a perfect mirror image. Nature actually distinguishes left from right. Her precision experiment forced a total rewrite of our foundational physics, laying the groundwork for the standard model of particle physics.
Okay, so we've torn apart atoms and found their hidden structures. Let's shift from the architecture of physics to the architecture of biology, the code of life, and systems of survival.
A completely different type of structure.
Right, and when you picture DNA, you immediately think of the double helix. But the only reason we know it looks like that is because of Rosalind Franklin in 1952.
Right, her famous photo 51.
Which is often misunderstood as just a lucky snapshot.
Oh, totally. The structure of DNA wasn't a visual guess. It was a mathematical convergence that relied strictly on Franklin's precise X-ray diffraction measurements.
She established the helical repeat and the distance between base pairs?
Exactly. The Watson and Crick model simply does not converge mathematically without her rigorous empirical data forcing it into that specific shape.
And going from the structure of DNA to how it behaves, Barbara McClintock was looking at maize, just regular corn, in 1948 and discovered jumping genes.
Which was so far ahead of its time.
She realized that genes aren't just a static blueprint carved in stone. They are a dynamic switchboard that can actually change position and respond to environmental stress.
And she was ignored for 25 years because the scientific community couldn't conceptually grasp her findings. They were deeply entrenched in the one gene equals one trait dogma.
They just couldn't see it.
Now, McClintock basically invented the concept of epigenetics and regulatory DNA decades before molecular biology developed the tools to catch up to her vision.
And speaking of things happening dynamically inside our bodies, if you've ever felt that deep burn in your muscles during a workout, you are experiencing the Curie cycle.
Discovered by Gertie Curie in 1929.
Right. She provided the foundational explanation for energy metabolism.
She figured out how muscle fatigue produces lactic acid, which the liver then converts back into glucose for energy. She anchored biochemistry as a quantitative molecular science, linking muscle physiology, liver function, and endocrinology into one continuous, coherent system.
We see a similar leap in understanding the human body with Rita Levi-Montalcini in 1951, and her story is incredible. Because of World War II, she had to conduct her early experiments in a makeshift home lab, using sharpened sewing needles as scalpels.
Sewing needles?
Yeah, and despite those conditions, she discovered nerve growth factor, or NGF,
Which overturned a massive medical dogma.
that the brain couldn't change.
Right. The consensus was that the adult brain was a static, fixed block of concrete once it finished developing. By proving that neurons respond to biochemical signals and can grow and reorganize, she proved the concept of neuroplasticity.
So our modern understanding of brain development, learning, and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, that all stems directly from her findings.
Directly from her makeshift home lab.
What really strikes me about these biological discoveries is how they scale up to save entire populations. Tu Youyou's story in 1972 is a perfect example of that.
Oh, the malaria research.
Yes, she was working in secret in China, tasked with finding a cure for malaria, which was just decimating populations. She reviewed over 2,000 traditional Chinese remedies, trying to bring order to medical chaos.
And she eventually isolated artemisinin from sweet wormwood using a really unique low-temperature extraction method. She didn't just optimize an existing drug, she created an entirely new therapy.
Which became the foundation for modern malaria treatment, single-handedly shifting the global survival curve and saving tens of millions of lives.
Tens of millions.
And that idea of creating a scalable, life-saving system is exactly what Virginia Apgar did in the delivery room 20 years earlier in 1952. If you've ever had a baby, or been a baby, which is all of you, you've been evaluated by the Apgar score.
It's universal now.
Yeah.
But before Apgar, newborn health was evaluated through subjective guesses by doctors.
Just eyeballing it.
Literally. And some babies who looked fine were actually in distress, and vice versa. She replaced that guesswork with a rapid, scalable, quantitative system assessing heart rate, breathing, and muscle tone at 1 in 5 minutes after birth.
It revolutionized neonatal survival rates globally.
Because it forced immediate, evidence-based clinical decisions.
Systems save lives. Let's take that concept of systems and translate it into the digital age. How did women architect the digital world?
Well, it starts way back in 1843.
With Ada Lovelace.
Right. Who wrote the first algorithm intended for Charles Babbage's mechanical computer?
But Lovelace's true genius wasn't just writing instructions, was it?
No, she made a massive conceptual leap. She realized that machines could manipulate symbols, not just numbers. She saw that numbers could represent music, text, or logic.
She conceptualized software.
A full century before the physical hardware even existed to run it.
Which is wild. And fast forward to 1952, and Grace Hopper brings that conceptual software into reality. She's famous for finding a literal moth in a relay and coining the term debugging, but her world-changing legacy is the first compiler.
Because before Hopper, programming required you to write in hardware-specific machine code. You had to speak the computer's exact electrical language.
Which sounds like a nightmare.
It was. Her compiler acted as a translator. It took human-readable instructions and translated them into machine code. She led the design of COBOL, which separated human logic from machine hardware.
Turning programming into a scalable, teachable skill rather than an obscure mathematical dark art.
Precisely.
As software became more ambitious, it needed to be completely bulletproof. Enter Margaret Hamilton in 1965.
The Apollo missions.
Yes, there's that iconic photo of her standing next to the coach she led for the Apollo missions, and the physical stack of paper is taller than she is.
And she coined the term software engineering because she demanded that code be treated with the exact same rigor as the physical rocket hardware.
She invented priority-based, fault-tolerant code.
Right. If you've ever had your smartphone freeze up because you opened too many apps, imagine that happening to the computer guiding you to the surface of the moon.
Terrifying.
But during the Apollo 11 lunar descent, Hamilton's software recognized it was being overloaded with radar data, dropped the low-priority garbage tasks, and focused purely on keeping the astronauts alive and landing the module.
Wow. And to organize the explosion of code that followed all of this, we have to look at Francis Allen and Gene Sammet from the 1960s. They really structured the digital landscape.
Francis Allen formalized compiler optimization. She essentially taught machines how to look at their own code and find shortcuts to run it more efficiently.
The literal foundation of modern parallel processing and supercomputing.
Exactly. And meanwhile, Gene Sammet stepped in to organize the human side of the chaos. She created a formal taxonomy for programming languages and coordinated the standardization of COBOL.
So she prevented the landscape of programming languages from fragmenting into completely incompatible dialects.
Right, she kept it unified.
And ensuring regular people could actually access this standardized digital world fell to Mary Kenneth Keller in 1965. She was a Catholic nun and the very first person in the U.S. to earn a PhD in computer science.
Which is amazing, and Keller played a critical role in standardizing computer science as a university discipline.
She championed the basic programming language, insisting that computers shouldn't be locked away for elite researchers in white coats.
She built the educational pipeline that democratized computing.
Yes.
She really made the personal computer revolution possible.
But once people had computers, those machines needed to talk to each other securely.
Oh, and this leads to one of the most unexpected stories.
Right. In 1941, Hollywood actress and inventor Hedy Lamarr co-invented frequency-hopping spread spectrum technology. The initial bill was to prevent enemy forces from intercepting and jamming radio-controlled torpedoes during the war.
The idea was to secretly jump between radio frequencies in a synchronized pattern. It's decades ahead of its time. But that exact concept of jumping frequencies securely is the direct ancestor to the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth you use every single day to connect your devices.
From torpedoes to Bluetooth.
Yeah.
But keeping those massive global networks from crashing is where Radio Perman comes in. In 1985, she invented the Spanning Tree Protocol, or STP.
Because in any large network, you need redundant paths in case a cable gets cut. But redundancy causes data loops.
Right.
Think of it like a city grid where every intersection is a roundabout and none of the data packets know how to exit. This leads to broadcast storms that can melt down the whole system.
Perlman's algorithm fixes that.
It acts as an invisible traffic cop, instantly closing certain roads to create a single, clear, loop-free path. It prevents the modern internet from essentially gridlocking itself to death.
Incredible. All right, from the networks of computers, we're going to pan out for our final section to look at the networks of people, human society, ourselves, and the entire cosmos.
The biggest systems of all.
Yeah. Margaret Mead revolutionized our understanding of society in 1928. Her field work in Samoa shook up the entire scientific establishment.
Because she provided empirical proof that human behavior, things like gender roles and adolescent turmoil, are profoundly shaped by culture, not just biology.
She defeated biological determinism.
She proved that our social structures are variable and constructed by us, rather than hardwired into our DNA.
And Jane Goodall took that redefinition of humanity even further in 1960. She goes to Tanzania, observes chimpanzees, and documents them stripping leaves off twigs to fish for termites.
They were making and using tools.
Which changed everything.
At the time, tool-making was considered the defining exclusive characteristic of humanity. By documenting chimpanzee tool use alongside their complex social bonds and emotions, she forced a profound philosophical shift. Science had to literally redefine what the word human even means if we aren't the only creatures shaping our environment.
Shifting to how humans organize themselves, and sometimes how those organizations fail, we have political theorist Hannah Arendt in 1951. She analyzed the horrors of the 20th century and gave us the concept of totalitarianism and later, the banality of evil.
Arendt's insight is chilling, but essential for understanding modern governance. She showed that great societal harm often doesn't come from sociopathic monsters, but from ordinary people failing to think critically within bureaucratic systems.
It's a structural pathology.
Exactly, where strict adherence to procedure completely replaces individual moral judgment.
But human organization doesn't inherently default to failure or depletion. Eleanor Ostrom proved that in 1990. She studied shared resources like local forests and fisheries, investigating the old assumption called the tragedy of the commons.
Her Nobel-winning fieldwork proved that the tragedy of the commons just isn't inevitable. Through local institutional design and polycentric governance.
Which basically means overlapping local authorities, right?
Right. She showed communities can successfully self-govern. People can figure out how to share and sustain local resources through community rules. They don't inherently destroy them or require a massive centralized government to step in and manage everything.
Finally, let's zoom all the way out to the stars. Katherine Johnson, in 1958, was doing the orbital mechanics for the earliest space flights. Her math was so trusted that John Glenn famously refused to fly his orbital mission until she manually checks the computer's calculations.
She converted theoretical orbital mechanics into practical operational flight plans.
She made human spaceflight a safe reality, translating mathematical theory into the specific trajectories needed to leave the planet and return safely.
And Vera Rubin takes us to the very edge of reality in 1968. She was measuring the rotation of galaxies and found a massive anomaly. The stars on the outer edges were moving way too fast.
Based on the visible mass of the galaxy, those outer stars should have been flung off into deep space.
Yes. Her rigorous empirical measurements of these flat galaxy rotation curves forced the universe to reveal dark matter. She proved that the vast majority of the mass in our universe is entirely invisible to us.
She measured reality and forced theoretical physics to catch up, showing us that the visible universe is just a fraction of what actually exists.
It's humbling.
It really is. Let's bring this all together. What you've heard today is a completely different architecture of history. These women didn't just add flavor to existing science. They laid the causal structural foundations for the buildings you inhabit, the internet you use, the medicine that cures you, and your understanding of your place in the cosmos.
Because knowledge is always most valuable when we understand its true roots. These sources show us that these researchers didn't just contribute to paradigms, they created the paradigms we live inside today.
That leads me to a final thought for you to chew on. So many of these foundational discoveries, McClintock's jumping genes, Payne-Gaposchkin's stellar composition, Leemann's inner core, were initially rejected because they contradicted the accepted consensus of the time. What widely accepted scientific dogma today is actually completely wrong, just waiting for an outsider to measure the anomaly and force us to rewrite reality all over again.
It's a great question.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.